So we're going to proceed straight into the second session that's going to be looking at perspectives on the Belt and Road Initiative. And then it will be followed by a Q&A session and discussion and reflective and closing remarks on the conference. And this panel will be chaired by Professor Philip Harrison from the School of Architecture and Planning, and also the South African Research in Development Planning and Modeling at Wits University. And we also have on the panel Professor Fang Dersheng of the International Business School in the Beijing Foreign Studies University. And Dr. Funeka Yazini April, Senior Research Specialist at the Human Science Research Council. And Professor Luil Haifang from the Center for African Studies at the School of International Studies at Peking University, China. And Dr. Bob Wekesa, the coordinator of the Mid-Career Honors Program at the Wits Journalism Department. Just a short introduction for our chair, Professor Philip Harrison. He has worked in the field of urban planning for around 25 years in public, private, and academic sectors. His experience includes serving as an executive director in development planning and urban management for the city of Johannesburg. As executive director in the city of Johannesburg, he was the head of department responsible for forward spatial planning for the city, the approval of development applications, spatial information systems, urban management programs, and had administrative oversight over special projects such as inner city redevelopment, the Alexandra Renewal Program, and the Cosmos City development. In April 2010, Philip was appointed by the state president as a member of the National Planning Commission and has been closely involved in the preparation of a national development plan for South Africa. So I'll just hand over to Professor Philip Harrison to proceed with the panel. Thank you.
Many thanks, Bongiwe. I certainly have many interests, if you like, in China-South Africa relations, and I've had the opportunity to spend a wonderful 6 months last year on sabbatical at Peking University, Beida. My academic interest, professional interest really is in the ways in which investment through the Belt and Road Initiative in rail, in roads, in ports, in ICT, impacts on the processes and patterns of urbanization and urban formation across Africa. And of course, China is an extraordinary laboratory in which to look at urban change. When its reform era commenced in the late 70s, it was an overwhelmingly rural country, only 17% urbanized. Today, I think it's around 56% urbanized. And so it's really exciting to look at that process, and to look at that process also in relation to the very rapid urbanization processes across Africa. Now, I'm just mentioning this because we're not going to have a presentation on the BRI and urban development, but it's a particular interest of mine, and I have a watching brief, and I certainly hope to do some empirical work on the real effect that the BRI is having in particular places in Africa. The BRI, of course, is an audacious initiative. Its scale, its ambition, and brings, as we've heard, multiple opportunities. But I think for some of us working in development planning and working in academia, we also have lots of questions. And we know that many of these questions can't be answered in one morning. So we have a lot of questions relating to the finance, to the governance, to the planning, and of course to the impacts in many different ways. So we don't expect all the questions will be answered today, but we do expect that this will begin a process of building understanding and a process of developing, deepening dialogue around the Belt and Road Initiative. And we certainly hope that with the platforms we have at Wits, with the Africa-China Reporting Project, which has played a key role in this initiative, with SIA, with other initiatives towards the Center on China Studies at Wits, that we'll have the platforms in which we can deepen and complicate the dialogue, if you like, over the course of next year, and bring other voices into the discussion. Of course, the embassy must do its job, and DIRCO must do its job, and the business sector must do its job, civil society, which holds government to account here, the media, and the university must do its job, and our job is around research, it is around debate, and it is around teaching. And in all of this, although we also have our different responsibilities and interests, it's wonderful when they come together in an interaction such as today, and we hope we'll have more on this. So this session touches on some of the many dimensions of the BRI. Okay, and it's impossible in one morning to deal with all the dimensions. So we are going to look at the big issues. We're going to look at geopolitics, but we're also going to look at youth and youth engagement and connections in the BRI, and also a very particular case study around a sector of the economy. And we need to get to that level of engagement where we're talking about quite specific things, and we'll look at the air industry. So, and then at the end, Kobus van Staden and our host, Bongiwe Tutu, will assist us in pointing towards future dialogue, and we'll try and bring some of the threads together. So we'll try and keep on time, make up a little bit of time. If I can ask the speakers to keep to time, maybe shrink presentations by 2 minutes, maybe help us with that. Professor van der Schang is the General Secretary of the Center for Global Governance Studies at PKU, and really an important scholar in China and on the world stage in terms of world politics, global governance. And we're hoping that he will help us understand some of the complexities in this increasingly difficult global environment, how events on both sides of the Pacific are having impacts on Belt and Road, and he'll give us some guidance there. Dr. Funeka April, known to many of us, is a research specialist with our Human Sciences Research Council. She brings a strong understanding of Africa's interests in the process through her work, for example, with the African Union. And she brings that together with a knowledge of China-Africa relations, and particularly the work she's done on FOCAC. I'm very happy to be able to introduce you to my friend and my previous sabbatical host at Peking University, Professor Liu Haifang. And she is in the School of International Studies at PKU, and particularly important for us is the fact that she's the director of the Center for African Studies, an important center with a lot of impact on policy in China, and so she's a significant figure in academic and policy-related work on Africa-China. And also delighted to have my colleague, Bob Wekesa, with us, who's a senior lecturer in the Department of Journalism and Media Studies, and his work will be known to many of you. Particularly the way he's written so widely on the media presence, China's media presence in Africa, and his work in the Wits Africa-China Reporting Project. And then I can't see Kobus van Staden, but he'll come up. Oh, there's Kobus, just there. He'll come up at the end, helping us to pull the threads together. He's had an interesting history as his PhD in Japanese and media studies, so he spent time in Japan, and he's of course shifted his focus to China-Africa engagements, and he's been an investigative journalist, and of course also a significant academic working on China, Africa, and I think he's the right person to help us make sense of everything that we've heard today. So there you are. It's an ambitious task for everyone, but please take us to lunch. And don't delay our lunch too much. I've delayed you a bit now, but so let me ask Professor Van to come to the stage.
Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So thank you all very much. So I just took my flight to arrive here on this continent for the first time in my life. So just in the past 20 hours, I was really impressed by the vibrant, how dynamic, of this continent. So with, based on my 20-hour experience, I adjusted my topic a little. So deepening the BRI cooperation through talents cultivation in a changing world. Usually my interest focus on the world, how the world is changing. But anyway, I think there's one important topic. That is how to count talents, young talents, in such a changing world to meet the challenges that we are facing now. So that's the topic I'm going to cover. 3 parts. Why do we need to do this? Why? The second is what we have been doing. Peking University and the other universities in the world, we have working together and to find a new mechanism to cultivate young talents, to meet the challenges and to solve the problem we are facing. And so the last part, my suggestions about how to deepen our cooperation with Africa in this regard. Okay, I would like to start with these slides. In the year 2016, October 23rd, Peking University invited a very important guest, usually the former leaders of the other important countries, to come to Peking University, and we had a conference about global governance. So at the last day, it's a conference like this. So the important guest is there, and the audience, the students of Peking University and teachers, questions and back and forth. 23rd October 2016, that's just 2 weeks ago for the results of the President of the United States of America. So the host here asked a question. So let's each of the panel members predict 2 weeks later who will be the President of the United States of America. One of our guests, I think you could see from the picture, he's a former British Foreign Minister, David Miliband. So he's 100% sure, for such a question he answers. If Donald Trump is elected to the President of the United States of America 2 weeks later, I will come to the School of International Studies of Peking University to study international relations from the very beginning. So he makes such a prediction and a commitment. 2 weeks later, that's the 8th of November, Donald Trump was elected to the President of the United States. So now we are still hoping David Miliband to come to our school to fulfill his commitment. Okay, so, but why these slides? The world is changing. So ambassador with very rich experience, and he's also a graduate of Oxford. So misunderstand this world, what's the world is happening. So I would not go to detail about the world, how it's changing politically, technologically, economically. So I think I will find another chance to talk about this. But I will focus on the main point that I'm here. So what we have been doing, the global, our world is changing very fast. Many people couldn't understand. We got nationalism, populism, we got, you watch CNN, right? More hatred and prejudice, it's like that. So what's happening? So we need to find a way to solve the problem and to cultivate the young talents to meet the challenges, to make our world move in the right direction. I think that's our mission. So in the past 2 or 3 years, we have started to set up joint programs. Especially, in the meantime, I work for the Office of Postdoc Affairs in Peking University. So in the past 3 years, we have set up 3 joint postdoc programs, fellowship program. One is Free University of Berlin in Berlin, and the other is with Princeton University. The third one is with International Institute for Applied System Analysis. So why this program is important? Because our world is changing. We need to cultivate young talents with global vision. That's very important. So based on this understanding, so we signed the MOU with the universities to cultivate young postdoc researchers. So, okay. So the first one is with the Free University of Berlin. That's in 2016, we signed the MOU. It's a 2 years postdoc program. 1 year in Beijing and 1 year in Berlin. So it's open to young talents with PhD degrees. So the benefits will be paid by PKU, Peking University, and FUB. That is Free University of Berlin. So for this program, when we first initiated our call for application, young talents from very famous universities like Oxford, like Columbia, they are very interested in such a program. So, and also, the program focuses on the BRI research study, area studies, different countries and different areas, especially focus on the current situation, whether political, economic, or social situations of the country. So usually, a lot of studies carried out on the past, but right now we need the young talents to focus on the current situation of the countries on the Belt and the Road, in this initiative. So that's why another discipline, another study field is data science. So we attracted very young talented students, and right now we have 4 postdoc researchers working simultaneously, at the same time, in Berlin and in Peking University. So that's the program, quite helpful, very highly qualified, highly talented young talents joining this program and conducting their research in 2 different universities. So the second one was initiated in December 2017. So it's also a 2-year postdoc program. So 1 year in Beijing and another in Princeton University. So it's focused on China studies, whether economical, right? Whether economical situation or society, culture, history, like that. Usually also, it's benefits paid by the 2 universities. And also we got a very large sponsor for this program. That is, the boss of WeChat, Mr. Ma Huateng, donated a large sum of money for such a program, So, and also we initiated our first call for application in 2017. And this year we got more than 50 students, 50 PhD holders to apply for this program. About 2/3 of the applicants, they from Princeton University, Oxford University, Stanford University, about 2/3 of them, the applicants are from top 100 universities to compete for the fellowship. So the third one is we set up in 2018, in April. This program is focused on global challenges, global issues. So we had it with an international organization called, IASA, we call it IASA. It's in Vienna. This program is also turns to be very successful because, as our world is changing dramatically, right? So we attracted young talents to come to Beda and Vienna, right? To conduct research on poverty, on water, on environment, like that. So that's a program we have been doing, and it's been turned out to be quite successful. So my last point, because time is limited, right? So suggestions on cooperation with Africa. For almost the whole morning, our ambassador and the guests in South Africa, talk about the importance of BRI. But in order to successfully initiate such, a strategy or initiative, we need young talents to conduct research. We need young talents to to be familiar with South Africa, and in the meantime to be familiar with China, whether politics, economy, society, culture, or history. So this is quite important for the successful initiation of the BRI. So I would, hope, one day, that's why I came here to this university, to South Africa, because we have to look forward, and and we have to find young talents to solve the problem, to meet the challenges we are facing now. So for the possible study, the fields of subjects, I would suggest Chinese studies or African studies, the global issues like poverty, inequality, water or food, etc. So with this program, if we could successfully initiate, set up this program, that means, the young talents, no matter what your color is, your nationality or your religion is, you are welcome to join this program, right? So we would attract young talents all over the world and to conduct research concerned with the BRI. So in this regard, I think, with the successful initiative of a program like this, we would cultivate the young talents for the future of our program, of our cooperation. I think that's very important. And in the meantime, I would, because during the tea time session, I met with, some people, who are doing business, here in Africa. So I would also invite the business people to join this program, whether it's a strategy for your business development in South Africa or in Africa, whether it's a technological problem that needs to be solved, for your company, for your investment, right? So we need to find the right people to do research and to give expertise to provide suggestions for the successful execution of your program here. So if the business people are interested, we could, entitle this program with the company, with the name of the company, or with the people who donate such a program. So we are, just like we have the program with Princeton, right? Okay. So the world is changing. And it's changing profoundly. It's changing dramatically. So now we are hearing more and more about hatred between different nationalities or race. So that's why, here in South Africa, there's a very famous, world famous leader called Nelson Mandela. So if we let this world go this way, most probably we will find a global prison cell. So we have to stop that. We have to find a way out to get the world to move to the right direction. So what's the way? So let's make our program global, and to attract young talents join this program, and to make it a global training, a global cultivation of the young talents to meet the challenges, whether it's the BRI or global issues or climate change. So as Nelson Mandela says, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. So we have to change the world to move to the right direction through our program, through our education, instead of to have the world go to a world full of hatred and prejudice. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's really important to us for two reasons. One, it's really important for us as a university that is trying to find the mechanisms for establishing partnerships with universities in China. So these sort of programs and the sort of relationships that Professor Fan has spoken of is critical for us to hear about. But secondly, this is absolutely critical for the BRI. I'm an academic, so I've got slightly skeptical mind. So when I hear about something as huge as the BRI, I ask questions about where's the capability and the capacity to implement these massive projects and programs in a manner that is partnership-based. So it's really important when talking about the BRI also to talk about programs that develop the capabilities, develop the capacities. I was thinking, for example, the sort of engineering management skills that are required for projects of this scale. So just as we talk about a geopolitical and investment initiative, we have to talk very seriously about building capabilities, and the universities have a particular responsibility in that regard. So thank you very, very much. Dr. April, let's hear from you.
Good morning, everybody. His Excellency, Ambassador Lin Sonteng, Dr. Ambassador Genge, our visitor from the Parliament, Mr. Frolic, that I always see only on TV. So it's an honor to see all of you here. I'd like to also greet all our academic colleagues here, and I see some comrades also sitting on this side, and everyone else who's part of the audience this morning. I greet you. I am going to be talking about the Belt and Road Initiative with the focus on the air industry. Is it possible I can get the what call? And so thank you very much. I'll be talking about the BRI. As we know from this morning, I'm sure that everyone knows that in 2013, President Xi changed the geography of economics when he introduced this new Silk Road strategy, which is now, as we've been talking about, is now called BRI. Since 2013, the expansion of air routes and the development of air transport has become one of the BRI priorities that President Xi himself actually is really pushing very strongly. The BRI initiative connects directly with the 2015 Africa-China Infrastructure MOU signed by Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, the former AU chairperson, and Mr. Zhang Ming, the vice foreign minister of China. The key focus of this MOU was on transport, high-speed railway, aviation, and the road highways, designed to promote interconnectedness and economic growth regionally and globally. As you all probably know, airway interconnectedness remains a challenge on the continent. 2 months ago, I was asked by the African Union to go and attend an infrastructure conference in Morocco. So when they sent me the flight, I had to fly from Joburg to Addis, from Addis to Egypt, from Egypt is 2 airports. You have to fly from one airport to another airport. So that was like about 4 flights right there just to get to Morocco. So I said, no, thank you. So they sent me another alternative where I was supposed to try and go now to Dubai. Then from Dubai, go to Paris. Then from Paris, go to Morocco. And again, I said, I don't think so. So these are the issues that, that we're dealing with, and this is why this MOU was so significant. The 2015 MOU was basically against the backdrop of Chinese Premier Li Keqiang's 2014 proposed implementation of the China-Africa Regional Aviation Cooperation Plan. The aviation agreement also comes against the backdrop of China having become the main driver of continental infrastructural and industrial growth. Needless to say, the issue of the BRI, inclusive of the aviation industry agreement, has captured a lot of interest and questions regarding its global impact. What does it really mean? What is it all about? Who is it going to benefit? So as for me, of significance regarding the BRI debate is how much of an economic game changer it will be, not just in Africa, but the entire field of international relations. The theoretical approach that I use on assessing the China-Africa Aviation Agreement is pragmatism. The theory of pragmatism stems from the philosophical approach by philosophers such as William James and John Dewey. In regards to this current BRI discussion, I chose Gerald Gutek's theoretical definition of pragmatism in the international relations discourse to mean the alignment of foreign policy with economic developmental interests. Based on the theoretical approach I've outlined for you, I'll therefore examine the China-AU Aviation Agreement by asking 2 questions. Can BRI fast-track the aviation industry on the continent? And 2, what does the aviation industry cooperation mean in terms of pragmatism from a continental perspective? In other words, is the agreement compromising the continental sovereignty by chance? Sovereignty, I must say, is a signature feature of modern politics derived from the Westphalia Order, creating the basis for the current modern international state or system of independent states that focus on maximizing their economic and political interests. So now let me get to the task of answering the first question. Can the BRI fast-track the aviation industry on the continent? And if so, to what benefit? I'll base my response on 2 things: background and capacity. When I begin with background, I want to emphasize how China has definitely already been engaging in the aviation industry and made serious headway to date. China has so far signed aviation cooperation agreements with at least 12 countries, and a number of African countries have already either been refurbishing their airports, as was the case in Ethiopia, or they rebuilt or they built a new airport, as was the case in Botswana. There is a table. I don't have much time as I just have a few days to prepare this presentation, but these are some of the airports that have been done by the Chinese government and Chinese companies, basically. And another point is that, in terms of background or foundation, is that China has already started training at least 500 aviation personnel from Africa annually. Now, what does China have in terms of capacity in regards to this aviation agreement? And we need to understand that the issue of China's capacity is very deep, because aviation is a very capital-intensive industry. It is not when you start, it's nothing to do with manufacturing clothes and retail and all those things. The aviation industry is much more deep and very technical and requires heavy investment in the purchase of airplanes and has very high operational costs. For instance, just one Boeing 737 costs about 98 million just to make. So it's an expensive business. Now, China, I argue, has the capacity because it has now become one of the few countries that can develop and build aircraft. In 2015, orders for the C919 exceeded 50,000, with domestic airline buyers, even countries internationally also from the US, Germany, and Thailand buying them. But also above this flight, we have the AR-1J21, which African countries, beginning with DRC, have started buying, which is one of China's latest aircraft. That, to me, is capacity to be able to deliver in terms of the BRI infrastructure on aviation. Now, I can give you many other reasons. I'll just give you a tip because of the time. So let me go to my second question in my discussion today. Does the aviation industry, what does the aviation industry mean in terms of pragmatism from a continental perspective? What does it mean for me or you? Basically, that's what it boils down to. I'll answer this question by first looking at the sovereignty of the AU member states from a regional and then a bilateral perspective. As indicated earlier, state sovereignty is the ability of the independent state to maximize its economic interests without disadvantaging its nation or region. This aspect applies to regional bodies, as we have witnessed with the Brexit matter in the EU, where some have argued that Britain breaking off will weaken the EU's economy and ability to negotiate the region's interest. So, will the BRI weaken the AU regional aviation interests per the theory of pragmatism? I want to first put to you that the AU aviation agreement with China was not signed nilly-willy, without thorough deliberation by the AU, meaning that the AU states exercise their statehood in applying a joint decision on this matter by focusing on policy premised on the AU Agenda 2063, ruling out governance elements of compromise. Secondly, the AU, by launching the single African air transport market to address current aviation challenges, strengthened its position in regards to aviation, particularly since SATAM is the first AU flagship under the AU Agenda 2063. So will it really become a compromised factor? And then thirdly, the BRI cannot weaken African regional statehood, so to speak. As China, at the recent forum in September, produced the Beijing Action Plan 2019 to 21, which states that China will support Africa in developing the single African air transport market and supporting connectivity. Now, I want to just go to sovereignty from a bilateral basis by using two countries briefly, Chair. Let me use Senegal as an example in regards to the aviation industry agreements. Senegal opened its airport in 2017 with Chinese partnership. Throughout the year after the airport was launched, Senegal's annual growth estimates rose to around 8%. Moreover, the airport has been structured to anchor Senegal's economic and technology center, designed to promote economic growth. Does Senegal then sound like a compromised state out of this development? Oh, and let me also indicate that Senegal even elected to name its airport in French, its former colonial master. So that in itself says that it still had some sovereignty to decide on key issues regarding naming, because naming is not a small thing. Naming is the representation. They didn't even use their language, the local language. Then let me also now go to the Botswana case. The Botswana case is very interesting to me because I actually followed it carefully. I literally did research. I went to Botswana several times. And I remember, I really cannot see this properly, but there's the small first airport. Oh, where are we? You know, I cannot see these slides. Is this the Senegal? Okay, yeah. So Botswana. Yes, is this Botswana? Yeah. So yeah, the Botswana case is very interesting because you'll see at that there's a small airport there. And when I remember seeing a sign when they started it where it said it's being developed by the youth of China and the youth of Botswana along with some construction companies. And I thought that was a very interesting model, and we should probably consider that with unemployment here. But anyway, going forward with the Botswana case interests me because of the debt issue. One of the key issues regarding the BRI that have been raised is, will China not be promoting debt among some of the countries that will be engaged? Now, China was involved in the construction of this airport in partnership with Botswana. And there were issues, and like in any project, there will be issues. But you know, despite all those issues that came up, they resolved them. And I remember when I first met Ambassador Song Teng, he was then the DG in Beijing, and one of his key issues was he will not let any countries like Botswana to not complete or have any struggles or concerns about any project work in their country. That to me doesn't show like a sign of trying to promote compromise of any nation in that sense. But going fast-tracking, President Masisi at the recent FOCAC summit, when he came, he announced how President Xi Jinping had canceled his debt that emerged as part of this construction also of this airport. And the debt that was canceled was about 80 million pula. Now 80 million pula in rand is about 160 rand, because their currency is stronger than ours. That's a lot of money. Now, on top of canceling that debt, China also offered 340 million pula. That's $31 million as a grant, not a debt, as a grant. Now, this was recently. So I agree that when it comes to infrastructure developments, it gets problematic. And there will be procurement issues and all those kind of funny stories. And I don't dispute that a country may go into debt if they don't handle their finances well, whether it is a BRI or another process. As President Xi stated in the recent FOCAC, when he wrote off the debts of some of the African countries, he said funds should not go towards vanity projects, meaning don't go and start building a tarred road to go to your house. Do what you're supposed to do. That's the bottom line. Spend the money wisely. Actually, it is the misspending that promotes a compromised state and defeats the idea behind the pragmatist approach. In closing, ladies and gentlemen, at the beginning of the discussion, I questioned whether the China-AU aviation agreement promoted pragmatism, which is the alignment of economic diplomacy. In the discussion, I also demonstrated that through capacity that China has and the strong industrial background in Africa, the BRI definitely has the potential to not only fast-track the aviation industry, which only represents about 2%. We only represent 2% of the aviation industry in the whole world, Africa. So it will fast-track this 2% to grow to maybe 80%. Moreover, if the implementation is premised on Agenda 2063, the continent will not be compromised, definitely. If anything, the BRI could serve as a strategic tool for the continent to try and push its weight in the global system, mainly through its emerging economies. With the fourth industrialization at our doorstep, global interconnectedness is non-negotiable. Suffice to say, President Xi, when he introduced the BRI in 2013, basically upgraded globalization to another level. Moreover, the BRI was even further strengthened by President Xi's concept of a common shared future and prosperity. Therefore, the BRI promises to be an engine of a new wave of globalization that is fundamental to the global industry chain, which could promote value add across the globe, which spells prosperity. Finally, from a modern international relations perspective, I would argue that when we discuss the impact of the BRI, we need to consider the industrial interplay of both international and domestic dynamics in the current global system. If we do that, we will realize that we need to also not just change the narrative of Africa's relationship with China, but Africa's relationship with the international arena, period, not just China, globally. And we need to do that by examining the global politics and the interests that are involved. The theory of practicism, I would argue, is really what China has facilitated over the years through its concept of win-win and practical cooperation. I want to, can I get that mic? That's, oh, no, fine, it's fine. I want to close off with this quote. I interviewed the African Union Infrastructure ECOSOC chairperson, and this is what he said to me about the issue of the aviation, because I'm part of that committee actually. And he said, the continent cannot accomplish regional integration without continental highways, railways, and airways. Moreover, China is not saying we have to fly to Beijing to go to Nigeria, as has been the case with European connections. They are saying they will build a super aviation highway of which we will benefit as we will become more regionally and globally connected. Has the European Union ever offered us this partnership? British Airways, Lufthansa Airways, just, you know, they usually just come here and do their thing and that's it. So to answer you, given that the aviation industry is a flagship project of the AU, I don't see how the BRI can compromise the content. If anything, the BRI will fast-track our plans. I'll close. I would like to say thank you, and I would like to also note it off with Ethiopian Airways, which I say, based on my research, is one of our major hopes with this BRI prospects that are coming up. Ethiopian Airlines is a state-owned airline which now has over 44 stations and over 56 destinations internationally. It's one of the best. And surely, it shows me that here in South Africa we can also do it, and we don't have any excuse if Ethiopian Airlines have managed to do this. So I'm just saying that there is a future with BRI, with the BRI. Definitely, Ethiopian Airlines stated there is no reason why we cannot all become very active in the aviation industry moving forward. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you for raising some of the underlying anxieties in discussion, such as issues of sovereignty and debt, but dealing with them in a constructive way and directing us towards the pragmatic concept of practical cooperation. And thank you also for talking quite concretely about a particular sector, because we need to move our discussions now in future engagements to talk about very specific issues. And airline cooperation is one of them. We could talk about other issues, railways, ports. I was taken by Garth Shelton's idea of Durban as a nexus between China and Africa. Hanif is in the national presidency, has just had to leave, but I was hoping that he heard that. So thanks so much, and let's invite Liu Hafang to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you, Philip. First, I want to say very much thank you for the organizer. It's a really, really great honor to be here to share some of my thoughts about BRR. I personally have been doing some research about the relationship between BRR and Africa. I think for the whole morning, our previous panel have been dealing with lots of very important themes, which if I can just summarize a bit, African position is number one, I would say, for China's BRR initiative. Secondly, China's biggest contribution probably coming to infrastructure. And thirdly, if I would like also expand a little bit, it's also related to my own role as an educator first in university. So how youth can join this program. So these three themes for me are very important. So I would like to contribute a little bit to these questions. First, I want to start with a myth, or just to unpack a myth that for a long time that has been around Africans' position towards BRR. If you look at the timetable, the diaries of the whole development of BRR, similarly, everyone has a kind of a question, where is Africa? Indeed, if we look at this diary, we want to say in the beginning, or Africa's position, and then until this time when the MOU already, the regulation, the principle, and then others all similarly all appeared. And then the three important organizations in China, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Commerce, and the National State and the Reform Council all have joined hands to launch the whole BRI initiative. Similarly, African seeming is missing. So the question we could just try to understand from a different angle, but I would like to say maybe it's not a kind of a myth that you would even suggest from rather negative view. So I would really like to understand whether there is a myth that BRI sort of doesn't count Africa and neglect Africa in the beginning. In the morning, we actually have Ambassador Lin's wonderful speech about the contribution from Africa and then the principle. And he actually also used to represent another very important position as DG of African Affairs in Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And then for FOCAC, he contributed a lot. I would argue if African come to the BRI initiative a bit late, it's just because our FOCAC, and which join hands with African members, has been doing so good. So therefore, BRI similarly is not a very urgent issue. And then I would also argue that FOCAC has set up, example, I actually learned from Ambassador Liu Guijin. This has been mentioned several times this morning. Now we have 38 all African members joined the African BRI initiative. Ambassador Liu Guijin, as a former DG before Ambassador Lin, he also the one who at his hand launched the FOCAC. And then this is a lady who from Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Madagascar. The lady suggests to Chinese side in the beginning that in 1997 is actually, she raised the idea that between China and Africa there should be some multilateral platform. And then with her urge and then with other African contribution, finally there was a BRI. And then according to Ambassador Liu Guijin, I quoted his words in the previous slide. He said, no, sorry, it's not here. Let me jump to the other slide, which you can just understand why I said FOCAC is very important to show that China could be a player for multilateralism, and therefore BRI has been learning a lot from FOCAC's experience. And therefore, when we look at the development of a BRI, that's not jump to the conclusion that African is not important. African has been playing very important role, joining hands with the Chinese side to help China's whole evolution of its foreign affairs, especially for how to dealing with multilateralism instead of only previously have been working on bilateral foreign diplomacies. So these are something I want to be in the beginning to emphasize. Africans' position always has been important, and then as this morning other panelists suggest now just to identify more advantages from BRI for African side. If we look at the evolution up till now, I have an argument that BRI as FOCAC has been also a very incremental process, not in the beginning already everything is there and then the whole idea is there. Actually, if you look at these 3 steps, which I periodized, you can say in the beginning it's only just an initial idea to work for a kind of a regionalism, regional integration and economic cooperation. cooperation. Secondly, second stage, we actually can see is getting full-fledged with a rather, including policy convention with the hosting part, and then also the very important side is the people-to-people relationship. And then thirdly, when President Xi Jinping made the speech, and in BRI in 2015, he also made another very important dimension that's not forget about, which is how China engage other countries in terms of BRI. So for these three stages, we can say how China is learning from the whole process. For me, it's also one of the cases that China has learned from FOCAC's experience. So in this way, I also want to argue another very important point. African also has been, just like FOCAC, has joined the whole process as one of the very important agency to push the whole agenda to proceed. So if we look at the history, the short history of BRI include Africa. Firstly, Africa's name showed in the meetings that this Chinese leader, one of our prominent leader, meet with Madame Zuma. So when they talk about Africa and the BRI, and that Africa become a kind of issue, a topic between the leaders. And then second stage, I want to also say that how African side, African agency joined this, not only from a government perspective, like Madame Zuma, also we have seen academic, like we have heard very excited that Professor Gauss Shelton has made his speech to us, and then also colleagues along this side, they have also contributed. For me, myself, I also have identified many other civil society members and the scholars have contributed to this champion that how Africa can benefit from BRI being a member of this initiative, such as this kind of idea has been put forward since 2013. And then also there is a website you can also check from this. They already had this idea, sort of Africans BRI initiative. So if you look at their website, there are lots of very interesting suggestions how the African joining the BRI can realize one dream, which is just a link up, which April just addressed the issue. So BRI definitely have inspired African civil society that to link up the continent is not a dream anymore. So these are some contribution, I would just argue, from African side. And then from Chinese side, similarly, including myself, my Center for African Studies in our Peking University, and also many, many other scholars have also within Chinese society to suggest that to fully, to officially acknowledge the inclusion of African into BRI is also very important to help Africans' development. And of course, the most prominent scholar that has contributed to this finalizing is Professor Lin Yifu. You probably all heard of his name, used to be the vice president of the World Bank, and he developed his very interesting idea about the African's position. So, of course, firstly, in his speech about One Belt, One Road plus one continent, he suggested how Chinese side could benefit from this collaboration with African on BRI, specifically for in entrepreneurs. Once China, the industry is facing upgrade, how you could find your next offshore to have your continuous operations. And then, of course, he also put forward some risks, such as the culture, the barriers of languages, so on and so forth. And then he, of course, suggests that we should have some solutions for these challenges for China. And then he even suggests that there should be such a kind of a coordination we have seen. It was launched last March in China, which was our new International Development Cooperation Agency. And then from Africa, as I said, Professor Lin also suggests the importance of African aids. Now, for China, it's offshoring its industry capacity. African have such a window opportunity, but it's just within several years' time, and then there could be 70 million this kind of a job created in Africa if African could seize the opportunities. So which raises very important issue is the importance of a human resource. What about the human resource situation on this side? And then from both sides, we got job to do. So this is really based on Professor Lin's suggestions. We should focus on the youth. And then there are lots of, has been discussed about the importance of African youth and development. I won't repeat those number issues, but my last March, my field work in South Africa, I gathered lots of wisdom, including from Ambassador Gengo, from your colleagues, from many in this room, scholars, Professor Gels Shelton, and then Elizabeth. Many of you have been helping us just to understand, for now, if to push China, South African's cooperation, where's the barriers? What are the important issues for us to address? So we identified the two most important issues at this point. Number one is people-to-people relations. As Mr. Aesop has mentioned, currently, not only because of the media environment is getting worse, and then also basically due to the language and culture barrier, we still have a lot to do to enhance people-to-people relations. I think this morning we also heard from government perspective to address the issues such as the legislators exchange. And then secondly, also very importantly, I think it's very converged, it's a shared view by so many people in this room already about importance of job creation, the youth, and the human resource development. So for this point, I would also quote many of my South African colleagues' point about based on their research, the vocational training in this country was not in a good situation since 1994, and then only lately there are some development, but it's still a big vacuum. And then how to address this issue. From Chinese entrepreneurs' perspective, how also make sure this kind of vocational training can match with the entrepreneurs' understandings. So based on our survey on those Chinese entrepreneurs in this country, we gathered also the most important challenges. Number one is really to have a suitable and qualified human resource. Of course, there are also other conventional challenges, but this seemingly is emerging as the most important issue to address. So with all these questions, I want to also use a little bit of time. If I should have I should be very quick to finish, but just make sure I can use some example to show the inspiration I gathered from my previous job, which I did in 2016, really under the support of Ambassador Lin, while he was the DG, support us to carry a project about ICT development in this continent, and then how people have the awareness about to use it for development purpose. And mostly we had 2 countries as our cases. Just more remarks about how I developed this idea to carry this project, because back to 1990s, I already heard from Professor Samir Amin, such an important intellectual person in this continent. He already suggested back to 1999 in Beijing, while I just started my job, he said, African is facing more challenges to slip into world 4th or world 5th if the digital divide this continent from the rest of the world. So I had this in my mind. I just feel we should understand digitalization as a kind of a not probably negative symbol, maybe a positive view. So this is really why I started this. And then from 90s, actually, this continent have a lot of development. I have all this statistic, but mostly I want to show youth are the one who really use the ICT technology. They basically grow up. They are born with this technology. Therefore, for the development of this infrastructure, really importantly, we should look at the youth. And then let me jump some of the slide here, just to directly goes to my findings. And then in Tanzania, I came across, you all understand Tanzania. It looks also everywhere because of China's support. 2006, there was a big loan, and then the optical fiber is everywhere. So the date we visit the Prime Minister's office. This is his office. He was showing us that from his hometown, basically the very remote villages, there was a big storm and then everything is damaged. But from his phone, he can show us the picture of the news. Basically, ICT infrastructure is there. But then how people have the awareness, how people can use it. We do have those visions from our visit to different ministries, different stakeholders. And then for the most important sectors, agriculture, I only gather inspiration from this young person called John, who used to work for many different international organizations until finally he decided he will work with entrepreneurs to sort of use this important mode he called Lutenga, which is his hometown, mode to develop agriculture in that country. What he did basically was, sorry, this was, oh yes. So basically, he trying to, on one hand, to protect ecosystem, and then on the other hand, to engage all the small farmers, and then using this kind of a contract farming system, but basically have ICT in his concept. So he actually used either manual or the phone to register people and then giving the support, the necessary support. You can see from this graph, the support coming from any kind of things like technology, like information about capital, about basic everyday skill. So he, in this way, help the local small farmers to join his system. And then in Mwanza, that province, there is such a good example. The product can be branding, can climb up to global value chain, and then people really have benefited so much from this system. And then I would say beautiful harvest as well as a new rural community has grown up from this model. And of course, he also get the attention from official, the president, prime minister, all coming to visit him and championing his concept and then also use. Of course, when we trying to look at the biggest province, agriculture province in Beya, we didn't have a very good, how to say, confidence so far because people lack of awareness how to use use it. Nobody coming to set up such a model like this. So along the lake, Malawi Lake, you can see people are still using very traditional way for fishing, for cropping, for daily life, and even the gender balance is really like a Euro, like traditional things. You don't say lots of changes yet, such as one of the families we visited. The local organizations gave the phones, gave a bicycle, gave lots of facilities, but all used by this man. And then the wife is working for everything, but we cannot see her. She was basically working for all the things, but those kind of a gender balance situation. Yes, I really have to wrap up. I was warned. And then I jumped to a case from South Africa, and then just, for me, it's very important to address specifically the issue in this country. This doesn't work very properly. Sorry. So, even for tourism in that country, in Tanzania, I also find how youth can develop their own business, they're innovative, to just really give lots of new hopes. And then in South Africa, I cannot have, but my own students in our university helped me to enter township in Langa. And then in this township, I met such an important person who actually showed me lots of a new hope. And then, sorry, it just try. The person I mentioned, he used to be a prisoner. He stayed as a youth. He stayed in prison for many years. Oh yeah, this is the guy. He actually, after he coming out, he learned his use ICT skill in UCT, and then he started his own non-government organization. He teach basically prisoners their basic skill to use ICT, and also the whole community in Langa, in that township, to try to help them to get new jobs. So with his, you say he also have crafts and all those kind of things. Since this doesn't move, I just quickly wrap up, as my chair said. Really, for me, the China's role for BRI has been rather for contribution for infrastructure, for this basic providers, basic development providers. But then how the entrepreneurs and then the African side can help to address the issue of this human resource and also this youth. I think for my suggestions, I would champion that our Chinese entrepreneurs would also go to township. I already visited many townships, and then I know the facilities are theirs. It's just basically you need just to open your opportunities to those youth, and also the Chinese government also opened 50,000 new scholarship per 3 years time, and then I think all these are very big resource for BRI, for the South African side to benefit from this. So how youth can gather all this support and then grow up, and then because they grow up with this ICT technology in this new age, I hope they can guide us to a better future. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
女士们、先生们，大家下午好。我是老师梅体国家Wits大学。 Now, you didn't clap for that. I suspect you didn't quite understand. But I was also actually going to ask the ambassador if I should make the presentation in Chinese or English without a translator. But I suppose that will be too much of a hard sell. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me this opportunity to share with you some thoughts on this very important and timely topic. My presentation, as you'll see, is based on seizing an opportunity, the opportunity that the Belt and Road Initiative presents. And as academics, we usually want to see a mega opportunity like this as an opportunity to actually undertake academic work. And as my senior, Prof. Harrison, did point out, academics are sometimes very skeptical. You know, when you have a big project like this, I think the policy end, which is the diplomacy, the civil society end, which is the activism end of things, will have their own interests. But for academics, we want to carefully look at what is being said with a bit of skepticism. And this skepticism is not necessarily meant to be terrible criticism, but rather constructive criticism, so that we can actually see how we advance the cause. I mean, criticism would be terrible if it is only negative, but criticism that, to borrow my colleague Yashini's perspective, you know, criticism that is both optimistic, pessimistic, but also pragmatic is actually very important, because then you identify the problem areas rather than sweeping them under the table or under the carpet, as it were. I'm sure this is not working very well, as Prof. Liu Haifang found out. It is stuck somewhere, but I was going to mention that, and now I've gone. So now my conceptual approach, and as I mentioned, as academics, we see these big projects and we want to look at what are the academic concepts, what are the intellectual perspectives that we'll want to leverage to study, and therefore, you know, go beyond the surface and scratch below the surface to see what is happening underneath there. So that the two conceptual approaches that I'm interested in are public diplomacy and soft power. And these actually two conceptual approaches have actually risen to the fore in the academic world, particularly on the African continent, because of the rise of China. So that when you look at a lot of literature on public diplomacy and soft power, it is about Chinese public diplomacy in Africa, Chinese soft power in Africa. For some reason, if we didn't have China, perhaps these concepts of public diplomacy and soft power will remain Chinese or Western concepts. In fact, I'd like to just pinpoint the fact that two of my colleagues who actually focus in this area are sitting in this room, Yushanu and Kobas. We have all focused on public diplomacy and soft power because of the rise of China in Africa. So you can see there's a contribution there academically. And mentioning that, in terms of seizing the academic opportunity that the Belt and Road Initiative presents, we actually need to focus, to go into the academic end of things, and this actually helps us to advance knowledge, skills, information, and so forth. Saying that, you realize that there are very few academics focused on Africa-China relations, and yet, on the other hand, Africa and China are the greatest economic partners. So that the volume of trade between Africa and China is the highest of any other regions. In fact, I'll dare mention again that apart from myself, Yashini, Kobas, Yushan, and I saw David Monyae of UJ here somewhere, there are very few scholars that actually focus on Africa-China. So there is actually an asymmetrical imbalance between the diplomatic and economic relations and the academic focus, which is why perhaps we need actually to seize the opportunity that Belt and Road Initiative presents to actually deepen academic engagements. Essentially, public diplomacy is the means and ways by which states and non-state actors influence or persuade foreign publics with the aim of promoting and achieving goals and interests. So, if you think of diplomacy, you actually think of our two ambassadors here, Ambassador Lin Songtian and Ambassador Genge. They are officials representing official diplomatic policy. But the fact that they are sitting here with us for the rest of the day is that they're extending state diplomacy to non-state diplomacy, because they are in an academic setting, and sometimes we might actually say some things that might offend them, but they will take it, we might say things that undiplomatically, but they will be there listening, and that is public diplomacy. And public diplomacy can extend to things such as companies interacting, cultural exchanges, and so forth. You know, every time we see an African student in China or a Chinese student here at Wits, we are actually seeing ambassadors in a sense. So this is the essence of public diplomacy. Soft power, similarly, is a concept that was developed by Joseph Nye, which essentially, Joseph Nye is a scholar at Harvard, who actually thought that he will come up with the concept of soft power being a nation's strategy to win the hearts and minds of foreign populaces through factors such as attraction, factors of attraction such as culture, values, ideology, and institutions. So the opposite of soft power, of course, is hard power, and I think many people have already commented on Mr. Donald Trump and the big American stick, which is actually the essence of hard power. So I think the Chinese, by offering scholarships, and I would like to mention that I personally studied at Communication University of China on a Chinese scholarship. That's the essence of the power of attraction, because while there I imbibed Chinese culture, and I can actually say one or two things about the Chinese. That is the essence of soft power. On the other hand, you have hard power, in which you say, unless you do this, I will actually not do that. Or if you don't do this, I will actually raise the stick and hit you very hard, as the Western world actually indicates. So I want to argue that the Belt and Road Initiative provides a great opportunity, not only to apply these concepts, but to actually study them. What are the public diplomacy and soft power aspects of Belt and Road Initiative? Now, I'll take you a step back a bit. As you can see on this map, and I think Prof. Liu Haifang also did use a map here, the landing site or location for the Belt and Road Initiative is the city of Mombasa in Kenya. Now, I think South Africans should not feel terrible that according to this map, it's not Durban, as Professor Garth Shelton said earlier. I think your turn will come. You know, I'm Kenyan, so I'm also promoting Kenyan diplomacy here. Yeah? And so, this being the landing site, the connectivity actually should see the linkages with the rest of the continent from that perspective, in my opinion. I mean, there could be another approach. In fact, as has been mentioned repeatedly, the railway from Mombasa to Nairobi has been already completed. And therefore, that provides an opportunity, if we want, from a policy perspective, from an academic perspective, to see where are the linkages. There's already the landing site, it's already there. So you have to, I think, structurally, ideally, policy-wise, see how it links there, okay? The map that I've just shared was actually developed in 2013. At that point, as many have pointed out, President Xi Jinping was just launching this initiative. It was initially called the Silk Road. I mean, officially, these are official names, not names I've come up with. It was initially called the Silk Road Economic Belt and the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road. I think this was a very long name, you can see. Then we had a new name also developed in early 2014 called the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road. I think 21st century to distinguish it from the old Silk Road and the Silk Road Economic Belt. I think this also seemed like it doesn't sound right. You know, it's too long and complicated. Then we had One Belt, One Road, which actually became very popular as a term, label for the initiative. And only lately have we seen it converted into Belt and Road Initiative, in fact in 2016. And I mention these names because you can see that the Chinese authorities were working very hard to interpret. They had the idea, now they're coming up with different names because they are negotiating on how should we present it to the world. In the meantime, us on the African continent were watching, not perhaps wondering what is happening there, but they were moving on, right? So from my perspective, having understood the various iterations of what has now come to be called the Belt and Road Initiative, what we need, and which has been mentioned in various guises today, is to look at an African agency approach, where we start with looking at what can Africa do, rather than what can Africa expect from China. The Chinese have already set up the initiative. It is, as someone mentioned, has a budget of $1.2 trillion. There's the Asia Infrastructure Development Bank in place. There's the BRICS Bank. Finances have been set up. Policies are in place. Agreements have been signed, and so forth. Now, what can Africa do? Should Africa wait for China, or should it say, look, from an introspective perspective, what can we do to plug into this major plan? And I think the relevant concept here is the concept of African agency, which says that Africa should be an actor rather than waiting to be acted on. And for far too long, Africans have always wanted to wait until you say, President Xi Jinping has said, there's $60 billion, give us a plan. Rather than saying, we start from home, going outside. I think it has also been mentioned variously throughout the day that the Agenda 2063 is the effective starting point policy-wise continentally, and particularly aspiration number 2 of the Agenda 2063, which talks about Africa as an integrated continent. Now, Africa has done well over the past couple of years. Good people, let us not always be overcritical of ourselves. Let me give you an example. From Dar es Salaam in Tanzania to Arusha in North Tanzania, we had very patchy roads only recently. With the Chinese investment, we've had roads carpeted and improved and so forth. And then from Arusha, the road towards Nairobi, now you're crossing into Kenya, was in a terrible state. That was actually also revamped with Chinese investment. And then the road from Nairobi to Addis in Ethiopia, which used to go through a place called Isiolo, the northern Kenya part, was in terrible state. In fact, in some places, that there was no road at all. That is now in place all the way to Addis. So if you're actually passing through them from Cape Town today, passing through the Maputo Bridge, which was unveiled the other day with Chinese funding, you can actually make your way up to Addis. Now, the problem comes when you leave Addis going towards Cairo, because the link between Addis to Khartoum and from parts of northern Sudan to Egypt is still undeveloped. Now, we have done well, but we can do better. And I think if we start by looking at our own needs, we can go in that direction. In fact, we have plans. And as some people have said, we have many plans, but implementation is the problem. As I've mentioned, the red line is actually the Great North Road. And although sometimes we're very critical of Cecil Rhodes, we must bless his soul sometimes, because he's the one who came up with this idea, in the way back. So as I've mentioned, in the past, all these corridors were actually very patchy in a sense. There's been quite some marked improvement. Now we just need to go to finishing various aspects of it. For example, the road from Mombasa, that is a green line. As you can see, once you enter Uganda or thereabouts, there's actually nothing, it's just tracks. Now it's just a matter of connecting that, just as the Kenyan section to Ethiopia has been connected. And for me, if the Belt and Road Initiative has landed in Mombasa and can make its way downwards, southwards to South Africa, across the continent, eastwards versus, towards the DRC Congo, into Cameroon, Yaoundé, and so forth, then we'll have benefited. So we have a plan. It's a matter of, we don't wait for the Chinese to tell us there's funds and there's BRI. We say, no, look, how does the BRI fit into these plans? Even if the plans have failed in the past, they can actually be revamped. In fact, this is the Belt and Road Initiative project that has already taken off, but it's supposed now from the railway from Mombasa to Nairobi is done. There's an extension going on from Nairobi towards Uganda, and after that it will move into downwards into Rwanda and Burundi. You know, Burundi, by the way, these are landlocked countries that have terrible economic states because of just being landlocked. You know, ferrying stuff from the hinterland onto into the seas or the seaports is quite difficult. As you can see, there's another route of this project, and I'm sure it is going to be done soon, that will come from Kampala towards South Sudan, a country that is affected by civil war and so forth. So now I'll have a couple of suggestions, because my discussion is based on the concepts of public diplomacy and soft power. I want to imagine we are speaking today here at Wits University, and Wits University has a very well-established engineering and built environment faculty. In fact, Prof. Harrison here is part of this faculty. Now, what can we do with Chinese academics to understand the engineering and construction aspects of the Belt and Road Initiative on the African end of things? The engineering and construction economics aspect of it, you know, the architectural aspect of the project. And I say this is an important area because in terms of economics, we've been told over and over what it means economically. We have no doubt that it will be an economically important engagement. In terms of international relations, there's some movement there. We discuss what it means for the rest of the world, what it means for African relations with the US, with Europe, and so forth. But I'm interested in the technical aspects. What are the Chinese going to do, and what can we learn from them? In fact, I'll go further and argue, as I mentioned earlier, we have to problematize some of these issues. One of my areas of concern, even I was saying very nice things about Prof. Harrison. He's asking me to wrap up, so, you know. So my concern is that we have seen Chinese companies come to the continent, build infrastructure, roads, railways, and so forth, and leave. Earlier today, Prof. Gert Shelton was mentioning that we need to invite more Chinese companies. I do agree, but I have some criticism. It is now 18 years since FOCAC started. Many Chinese companies, you know, China Road and Bridge Company and so forth, have come to the continent and done roads. But then, haven't we as Africans learned also how to do those roads? Why can't African companies do the roads? Why can't they do the railways? What can we learn? So I think the public diplomacy and soft power perspective can help us reach there. Because you see, why it is crucially important is that when we contract Chinese companies, we also see that foreign revenue will end up in China some way. So for it to be properly win-win, we need to see South African companies winning contracts in Chad to do roads, at least the basic roads. We want to see, if you finish the Mombasa-Nairobi Railway, we want to see after 5 or 10 years, an African company is doing a railway in Botswana. So that we don't, you know, because there's the whole thing that we've also discussed for a long time called dependency. I mean, we don't want to be dependent on China forever. Rather, we want win-win cooperation in which we learn from them, they learn from us, and so forth. Have I completely run out of time?
Half a minute.
I have a half a minute. I wonder what one can do for a minute. I'll negotiate for 1 minute and just share with you this picture. This is the picture of Chang Ha, whom Ambassador Ling Sondian mentioned. There is a historical perspective to this. You know, the Chinese landed in Mombasa on the East African coast in 1418 or thereabouts, and I think this is the reason why, you know, Mombasa has been made the landing site of the Belt and Road Initiative. But we do not understand further historical aspects of it. So I think there's an opportunity for us to discuss the Belt and Road Initiative from a historical perspective. And I think historians can come in, you know, and discuss that. I wanted to just end with this, because I've kind of had to skip some slides. On this picture, you see rock art, which is particularly famous in South Africa, but also parts of other African countries. And look, if you look at that and look at that, do you see any similarities? This is Chinese characters and the Chinese calligraphy. I'll invite you to look again carefully. Let me just go back there. Look at that. Here we have what we call pictogram communication. The ancient Africans communicated by, writing, drawing of, stuff on rocks in caves, right? And look at that. Chinese characters. The language that we call Chinese is also based on pictograms. It initially started as kind of drawings of stuff. Now look, here there's a connection, even in terms of art and communication. What can we learn? It appears, in fact, that we have some common, either ideationally or in real terms, we have a common destiny. I mean, we have a common origin, as it were, or at least we thought the same way at some point in the past. With those few remarks, thanks for listening to me.
Thank you very much. This is the soft power of Bob Wekesa. So he really brought us into the academic terrain, but he also grounded the discussion so nicely within the African context. And I love the maps, because it's been a geographer in background as well. I think we've come a long way this morning. This should have been a 2-day conference rather than a morning conference. And so I have to apologize to the audience, because I know a lot of people might have something to say, but unfortunately lunch is calling, and time is really very short. I see there's someone who has something really important to say. I'll take two comments. It won't be questions, because we won't have time to come down. Is the roving mic there? Roving mic? I can take 2 quick comments, and then we're going to ask Kobus to come and pull together some of the threads, please.
Thank you, Prof. My name is Thobekile Twala from South African National Civic Organization, which is the biggest civic organization in South Africa. Thank you very much for the presentations that have been done. We feel very inspired. We always attend these engagements, but one concern becomes that it becomes a lot of information, like you said, Professor, now, to be able to absorb everything. To avoid making this a talk show at the end of the day, because if you cannot be able to go back and implement whatever discussions that have been taken, it ends up becoming just a talk show. I just want to find out how do we ensure that we realize the objective, especially for the youth in the African continent. Why I'm saying this, because we've got youth that have got very good ideas, but however, like one of the speakers have indicated, that the banks, in most cases in South Africa, are not prepared to finance the programs that come up with, especially people from previously disadvantaged communities. Now, in this platform, what is it that we can decide, what is the resolution that we can take today, that we can take further to ensure that we create a further platform that is going to be used by our youth to further ensure that they participate to be future entrepreneurs and leaders, and to boost the economy of Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who has something burning to say? There's a hand over there. We're going to make this the final comment, unfortunately. There's a problem with the microphone?
Thank you. My name is Nhlanhla Ngulube from Deloitte. Just a quick question. I spent 2 years doing my master's degree in China. I came back last year. During that time, I got to travel between different universities in China, speaking to some young scholars, and I found that there wasn't a lot of interest from those young scholars in coming to Africa and studying more on China-Africa interactions. In fact, the most popular destination was still the USA and Europe. So how then how from the Chinese perspective can young Chinese scholars be encouraged to, become more interested in what's happening in China-Africa from an academic point of view?
Important question. Okay, if there's a third person, is there a third person who just wants to raise a point? Thank you, please, let's take the third one.
Thank you. My name is Itumaleng. Also, I just want to compound on that particular question that the gentleman just raised. I also spent a lot of years, 4 years or so, studying in China. But for me, I realized that South Africa had not invested at all in bringing its students over to China for the student exchanges and also scholarships and stuff like that. The rest of the African continent actually does pay quite a lot of attention on this particular window period of opportunity that's coming in. And South Africa is literally just nowhere to be found.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see any other hands. Let me just say this. This can't be the end of the process. So I think after this session, we'll certainly be engaging again with the embassy, with the ambassador. I'll be engaging with my colleagues. Barry van Wyk, he's been hiding away there, but he's been a big force behind this event from the Africa-China Reporting Project, Dr. Yang Yen from the International Office, and other colleagues in the International Office, because what we want to do is we want this to be the start of something. So there's so many different, you heard the questions. These are issues that need answers, even if we can't give them today. There's so many points of discussion we have to take up. So let's think about a program of beginning to engage in the issues around youth, for example, as well as the practical issues around engineering, the issues that Bob started to raise at the end in terms of his suggestions. And I'm really hoping that next year we can put together a series of engagements that will lead to quite practical outcomes. And of course, we're hoping that people from the banks that are sitting here, if not, then we bring the banks into the discussion, for example. So again, sorry that we don't have enough time to air everything as it should be aired, but we're going to ask Kobus then to pull together very quickly, Kobus, in 5 minutes, do you think it's going to, some of the key threads that we need to take forward into the new year, and then our host, Bongiwe, I'll hand over to her, and I think she will have some closing thoughts as well. Thank you so much. And please, a big hand for the panelists.
Thank you so much. This was an extremely interesting event and I think extremely useful. It was fascinating to hear the relationship between the Belt and Road and Africa discussed both from a very high level as well as from a more kind of on the ground level. And I think it raised very interesting questions. So I'm going to just reflect on them very briefly. I think one of the really important points raised is that the Belt and Road Initiative to a large extent represents a new form of globalization or a new chapter in the history of globalization. Of course, Africa was very much part of globalization from the beginning, but in an extremely negative way. Globalization impacted on Africa in the most destructive ways possible. Now, with a new chapter of globalization arriving, it is really important for Africa to position itself in a different way. And I think this became, I think, maybe the key theme of this morning is the issue of what Africa wants to get from this process and how Africa can cooperate with other actors to try and position itself in a more constructive way. For that, I think it then becomes really important for Africa to have hard conversations about what specifically it wants from the Belt and Road. So, you know, many speakers have raised the importance of Agenda 2063 from the African Union as a kind of a blueprint for African development. And I think you really can't overstate the importance of that blueprint. However, I think we need to move beyond the kind of broad discussion of Africa needs development, Africa needs to, you know, kind of include its youth in development, Africa needs to beneficiate its resources. All of these things are true. However, we need to move beyond that discussion towards, we need to, you know, towards saying we will achieve it through this project and not that project. You know, kind of to have hard decisions made about what exactly Africa wants to propose. I think several speakers raised the point of how important it is for Africa to be proactive, not only in terms of engaging with China as a whole, but engaging with China through specific projects that should be prepared, should be, you know, kind of where feasibility studies should be done, where the planning should be done about how these projects are going to create jobs, which specific jobs for which specific Africans. I think it's high time for Africa to become extremely specific and pointed in terms of how it engages with China from now on, rather than dealing with it in broad strokes. Within that, African decision-making and African agency is key. This is a moment where Africans can really decide how exactly they would like to position themselves, what exactly they would like to achieve over the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. The Belt and Road Initiative can't necessarily fulfill all of those, but it offers a set of unique potential for engagement in a way that I think wasn't open to Africa in the past. So then I think it becomes a real issue for Africans to discuss exactly how they would like to move forward and exactly what their own decision-making power entails. Who makes decisions in Africa? Where does the agency lie in Africa? Does it lie in governments? Does it lie in the AU? Does it lie in civil society or in local communities? The answer is yes to all of those. But how all of those work together, how they all fit together into a shared African agenda, that hasn't been resolved yet, I think. And that is, I think, a conversation, very fruitful conversation was kicked off today, and it will continue on. One of the places where it will continue on will be in the next few days. On the 3rd of December, my institution, the South African Institute for International Affairs, we're holding a big event relating to exactly this issue, the issue of African decision-making within its relationship with China. So, you know, we hope to cooperate with all of our colleagues and all of our friends in the China-Africa community, within academia and beyond, to try and move this conversation forward. And I think today has been an incredibly valuable, massive first step. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cobus, for that holistic reflection on the conference. I wish to extend our great appreciation to our honorable guests and speakers who joined us here today, and those who've traveled far to be here and to inform the public and engage on this topic of the Belt and Road Initiative. As it's been stipulated over and over again, this is the beginning of an ongoing engagement by Wits University and with the embassy on unloading the Belt and Road Initiative. So I want to thank everyone everyone, and we look forward to these kinds of engagements. At the beginning of the conference, I asked everyone by a show of hands why they were here today, as to whether they were here because they were experts on the Belt and Road Initiative, or whether they were here because they wanted to know more on the Belt and Road Initiative, or whether it was because they knew nothing at all on the Belt and Road Initiative. And the reason I asked that, and from the indications that we received in engaging with everyone during the tea break, I noted how those indications have changed over time during this conference, how those who said that they were here because they didn't know anything at all about the Belt and Road Initiative felt as though they were experts in their own right of the Belt and Road Initiative. And so I feel that speaks to the usefulness of this conference, and I want to thank and congratulate our speakers for informing the public, and I look forward to further discussions on this. And we thank everyone, and enjoy your lunch and have a wonderful day further. Thank you.